Ed Bernstein Show. Now, here's Ed.
Well, she's written 15 books, 7 New York Times bestsellers, 4 of them hitting #1, and she's running for President of the United States. Marianne Williamson, welcome back.
Thank you, Ed. It's great to see you.
You know, I mean, you have done so much in your career, in so many different aspects of life. I mean, whether it be charitable with AIDS activism and HIV, whether it be with grief and spirituality, and taught Course on Angels. You've done so much, and you've done extensive work with ill and dying. And I should mention, and I want to thank you, because last time you were here was about a month after my daughter had passed. And you and I had some conversations, and I really appreciate the advice and the information I got from you, and the empathy, as well as the time you spent with me. I mean, it was an important thing for me at that time. And it's never easy to talk to somebody who has a loss. I mean, most of us don't even know what to say, right? Oftentimes you lose somebody, and the first thing somebody else says is, "Oh, I lost, my mother or my father or my child," and it's awkward, right? So, but I appreciate what you did. Thank you so much. And we talked then about issues, and I rewatched our interview last night, and I'm going to talk to you about the same things today.
Well, I'm talking about the same things today.
Yeah, whether it's medical care, whether it's the environment, whether it's the economy, whether it's minimum wage, whether it's women's issues. And if you don't mind, a little bit later in the show, I'm going to bring my wife in, and she wanted to chat with you about some women's issues.
Fantastic.
But it's the same issues. We've gone nowhere.
Well, you said earlier, before that we started recording, you actually said nothing ever changes. And that really is the message here. It's not only why I'm running again, because nothing has changed from 2020, but because of the broader recognition that I think is needed in this country, that the system is not going to change unless and until the people intervene. There are certain things that are baked into the cake at this point. The fact that there is no higher minimum wage, the fact that we do not have universal health care, the fact that we do not have tuition-free college and tech school, the fact that there is an increasing number of homeless on America's street, and all of the increasing crises, such as housing and so forth. It is baked into the cake that those things are not handled, because actually solving those problems would run counter to the dominant paradigm of put short-term profits for huge corporate entities first no matter what. And that's why I'm running, because if we continue to elect the people whose entire career is about maintaining and perpetuating the system as it is, then all we're going to get is a continuation of the system as it is. So we shouldn't be afraid of change. What we should be afraid of is not changing, because we're 6 inches from the cliff, and we need to make a U-turn, and we need to do it now.
Well, it seems to me what's baked into the cake is the system. And the system is, because I know that you're having difficulty getting into debates, getting some media exposure that as a candidate for President of the United States, you should be getting.
Absolutely.
Right? That's what's baked into the cake. It's like there's 2 ordained candidates, and that's it.
Well, let's talk about that, though. The system, which you just described, is what I describe, which is a system in which corporate power has dominance over democracy at this point. So you look at these mainstream television networks. I'm nationally at 10%. Vivek Ramaswamy is at 8%, and yet he's on every possible show right now.
And I was going to say that. And you're higher than Pence.
Right, exactly,
right?
Exactly. So not only is it the news media, because the news media and the political system are married in this unholy alliance. It's a political media industrial complex. And at this point, it's not just that the political parties serve their corporate donors. They are huge corporate interests. So absolutely correct, peripheralizing my conversation, peripheralizing my candidacy, invisibilizing me, basically. Let's just pretend she doesn't exist. That's their strategy. I mean, I remember when I first announced, I heard a young woman who was a pundit on one of the, must have been MSNBC or CNN. She was obviously miffed that I was running. She said, I think we should just ignore her. I think we should just pretend she's not there. I thought to myself, naively, well, they can't do that. Right. And that is exactly the playbook. And I think it should concern all of us.
How do you describe yourself? I mean, you're a Democrat.
I am a Democrat. So I'm a left-wing Democrat.
So progressive Democrat?
Progressive Democrat.
Put yourself in that category?
I think of myself as a Roosevelt Democrat. I'm all about...
Which means what? Explain what a Roosevelt Democrat is, because a lot of our viewers don't even know who he
that's
is.
Right. People keep saying that to me, Marianne. You've got a whole generation for whom that's like, hello. Okay, Roosevelt believed in using the powers of government to advocate, most primarily for the working people of the United States. He said, as he said, a necessitous man is not a free man. So he said you cannot have freedom without without an ability economically to survive, without constant stress. And yet for the majority of American people today, life is a source of constant economic stress. You have 500,000 people who are hungry here in Nevada. I mean, this is in state after state after state in the richest country in the world, where the level of homelessness, the level of housing crisis, the level of medical debt, 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. So, and in every other advanced democracy they have it. In every other advanced democracy they have tuition-free college. So what Roosevelt talked about was the 4 freedoms, not only the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, but the freedom from want and the freedom from fear. The majority of Americans live in a constant chronic state of fear and want. And the political system basically invisibilizes that the way they invisibilize my candidacy, and for the same reason. Let's just not talk about that. Let's just play to the 20% of Americans who are doing fine in this economy and go on our merry way, which is not only the detriment to our democracy, but destroying our democracy.
But it seems like that 20% that gets catered to are the 20% that vote.
And who donate.
And donate, right. Let's talk about some solutions for the things you brought up, because I don't think you're going to get much disagreement from most people that those are problems.
The majority of Republicans as well as Democrats want universal health care.
Right.
The majority of Americans, Republicans and Democrats, want tuition-free college and tech school. The majority of Americans, Democrat and Republican, including gun owners, want common sense gun safety laws such as universal background checks. What I have learned in this process is that the American people are not the problem. The American people, we're decent people. We're no better than others, no worse than others. We are a decent people. And if you look at poll after poll, we're a little bit left of center. And that's not where the problem lies. So Jefferson said the only safe repository for power in this country is in the hands of the people. But it is not currently. Power is in the hands of a marriage between corporate and a political power, in which the will of the people is routinely cast aside in favor of the will of the corporate donors.
And you've been right at the cutting edge of what I think the hottest issue right now in this country is, and it's whether or not we're still a democracy. Right? Because what you're really saying is that if the majority of the people feel this way, we should be voting this way and legislating that way. But we're not, because our democracy doesn't seem to be working the way it should be.
So you just said voting that way. They have voted that way. The Democrats had the House and the Senate and the White House. The Democrats had the House and the Senate and the White House the first 2 years of Barack Obama. Republicans often in the modern era will overreach and abuse the power of the presidency. The Democrats too scared to actually use it because they're trying to have it both ways. I'm talking about the corporatist Democrats here. So the problem is not, we keep blaming the people. If the American people have put the Democrats into the White House, into the House, and into the Senate, I'm sorry, there should be a higher minimum wage. I'm sorry, there should have been the codification of abortion rights. I'm sorry, there should have been, at this point, guaranteed sick pay. There should have, on a federal level, there should be universal health care. There should be tuition-free college. If both parties are on some level beholden more to corporate interests than to the people, that is a crisis in our democracy, and that's why I believe it will take someone coming from outside that system to break that very, very malevolent cord.
Yeah, I remember, 20-some years ago, we were fighting for a $15 an hour minimum wage.
Right.
But it seems like, did COVID create that? Is that happening now, irrespective of government, just because post-COVID it was just people, you couldn't get people to work, and now, the salaries went up?
Some states, yes, yeah. in some situations, and some states are providing it. But this is what happened. The president came in saying he wanted the higher minimum wage, 15. Let's talk about that also. In most major cities of the United States, a living wage is over $20.
I was going to say, you can't raise a family on $15 an hour.
So what exactly. And a third of America's workers live on less than 15, and half of them cannot find a place to live. But let's look at the trajectory of this administration. The president said he would raise it to 15. He got in there, he did raise it to 15 for federal workers. Mm-hmm. Then he tried to put it in the COVID relief bill, that it would be 15 across the board. You know what stopped him? The parliamentarian, who has no actual political authority. I assure you, Ed, no Republican would allow the parliamentarian to stop them. When George Bush was countered by the parliamentarian, he fired the parliamentarian. Mm-hmm. What did Joe Biden say? Sorry, my hands are tied. Can't do it. The parliamentarian said we can't. Yeah,
one side plays a little bit more aggressively than the other side. And you mentioned homelessness. Yeah. Look, everybody is, I think, nobody likes it, right? But I really don't know of any ideas to stop it.
Well, a couple of things to talk about here. I have, and which people can find on my site, an economic bill of rights. Franklin Roosevelt had written an economic bill of rights. I've adopted it for the 21st century, and it includes guaranteed housing. We have 600,000 people who are homeless in the United States, and we should all remember how many of them are people who are working full-time. In California, 1 in 5 of the students at California's community colleges are living out of their car. We have people who are working full-time, living out of their car.
Or vets.
Not only that, you have the highest eviction rate last year since the housing crisis, which was over 3 million people. So when you have people living paycheck to paycheck, when you have people rationing their insulin, when you have people who cannot afford a $400 unexpected expenditure, it should surprise none of us how easy it is for people to simply fall through the cracks and no longer be housed. Now you have, in addition to that, the fact that real estate companies, BlackRock, Vanguard, et cetera, they're coming in and they're commodifying housing. They are buying houses at the highest value they can. So we don't have a lack of housing. We have a lack of accessibility for so many people who simply cannot afford the prices.
Yeah, especially at $15 an hour, cannot afford rent.
And we have 500,000 people, 500,000 units that we could, through a kind of public works program, make available as housing for the 600,000 homeless.
Claudia, if you want to start making your way over here.
Oh, my goodness.
But I wanted to ask you, while she's coming on the set, about age.
Age, yes.
Age.
I know it well, Ed.
Look, we're not spring chickens
either. No.
Okay, I'm a couple years older than you.
And
but Donald Trump is 78 or something like that. So. Biden's 80, McConnell, Feinstein. What is your feeling about that?
The American people can see this for themselves. It's difficult for me to tread there without getting sort of personal.
Right.
And I feel I have enough policy differences with the president to mount my campaign. However, we're not stupid. Our eyes are open. People understand this is the most stressful job, I'm sure, in the world. Mm-hmm. And if he's having the kinds of difficulties that he's having now, what will that mean over the next 4 years? So it's certainly a legitimate thing for people to be concerned about, but I don't want to weigh in any way that would seem mean-spirited.
Okay. Claudia, you have life coach and doing podcasts for women, you wanted to chat with Marianne about some women's issues.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the time. I was reading a lot about where you stand for women, and one of the things that you said is that as a first woman president, you would advocate for the things that women care. What are those things in your perception?
Well, first of all, one of the first things I would do is pick up the phone, call the archivist, and make sure that the ERA is published. That's all it would take at this point. Enough states have ratified, and it's time for the ERA to be published. That will make a tremendous difference in the lives of women because the pay gap will be eradicated. That's number one. Number two, I feel that motherhood and issues of our children should be first and foremost in public policy. I think of children as the largest really collateral damage of this system of unfettered capitalist dominance over our politics. Children are not old enough to vote, so they have no constituency. They're not old enough to work, so they have no financial leverage. I want to establish a Department of Children and Youth. I think we need a massive transfer of our resources into the lives, really, of children 10 years and younger. You know, if somebody brings up the topic now, for instance, let's fix our educational system, that's almost quaint, because some of the trauma that these children are experiencing is before preschool.
Exactly.
You hear people talk about things like trauma-informed education. Important, but we have to ask ourselves, why is childhood such a trauma for so many millions of children?
Exactly.
So for me, as a woman president, the issue of motherhood and care of children will be first and foremost. I want that Department of Children and Youth, and it is absolutely unacceptable to me that we have so many hungry children in the United States. You have 129,000 hungry children here in Nevada. Now, what happened last year or the year before was that they passed the child tax credit, which cut child poverty in half. First of all, if we could cut it in half, we could eradicate it. But even beyond that, this child tax credit did cut that child poverty for 6 months. And when it expired after 6 months, they did not permanentize it. That's the type of thing that's not going to happen in a Williamson administration. The American people would hear about that from me.
Why they stopped it?
Because the things like that, I'm not sure, but I think it was Joe Manchin at that point. Because these kinds of tax credits, these are the kinds of things that fly in the face of putting business interests first.
How do you think we can stop so many women homeless?
Well, when you look, it's interesting. If you look at the economic condition of a single mother in the United States versus the economic situation of a single mother in any other advanced democracy, in every other advanced democracy, they are on par with married or partnered women. They're on par. But only here, of all the advanced democracies, is the single mother down here. Why? Because she doesn't have universal health care, because she doesn't have free child care, because she doesn't have paid family leave, because she doesn't have tuition-free child care. The system in America, and we all know this, if you're in the top 20%, the situation has give. The system has give. You make it one year, you don't make it as well the next year, but there's so many ways in which we're sort of buffered from the worst. If you were in the bottom 80% of American earners, there is no wiggle room. So that woman, she has, let's say she has a sick child.
Right.
Let's say one of her children is on insulin. There are and now the moratorium in terms of eviction is closed. So when you say, how do we keep so many women from being homeless, create a situation through child care, through universal health care, et cetera, where she's not having to spend every dollar that she has on so many things that at some point the system breaks and she simply can't afford her apartment anymore.
And it's also at work, because I remember when I was a single mom, if my kid was sick and they wouldn't give me permission to miss work, then I am unemployed, and then because I'm unemployed, I don't have money to pay my rent, and if you don't have money to pay your rent, you end up being homeless as well.
You just described it perfectly. You just answered the question. And now what we as Americans need to do is to hear your story and not stop there, to actually take in that there are millions of women going through what you just described. There is so much trauma and heartache in what you just said.
Yeah.
And we too often hear it and move on. No, really hear it. And that's why I feel that someone serving in the White House who really hears that and does not find it tolerable
You know, I want to ask you a question about women. When we talked 5 years ago, before the last election, the last presidential election, there were an inordinate number of women candidates that were running for office, and many of them got elected. I thought to myself, this is quite encouraging, that we're going to have all these women now legislating. Well, look backward over the last couple of years, and some of these women are a little bit more even off the wall than some of the men.
Look what's happening in Arkansas and in Iowa. One of the things that, as a woman, makes me most upset is that they're actually gutting the child labor laws.
Yeah.
We've already had children dying in these situations in factories with saws and all kinds of things, losing hands, the most hideous things. But guess what? The two states that are leading this gutting of the child labor laws, i.e. Iowa and Arkansas, are both led by women governors.
Oh my God.
Kim Reynolds in Iowa and Sarah Huckabee Sanders Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas. You're right. You know, the patriarchy is in your head. It's not in your genitals. You know, the idea that women and children just somehow don't matter as much is a malevolence of the brain, not of our sex. And unfortunately, you're right. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a couple of things about your spiritual journey, if I may, because I think that it's very important that people not only see you as a candidate, but they also learn how you are inside. And I was reading a lot of things about your book, A Return to Love, and you said, even though you've been in 23 different countries 20 years later, love is a universal language. The power of love, of forgiveness can change the world. Why do you think this is such a hard thing for people to understand? I mean, especially nowadays, you see things in social media that empowers you to talk about love, talk about forgiveness, and people still not getting it. Why do you think is that?
My sense is not that people don't understand it. I think the problem is that people do understand it, but the dominant social, political, and economic systems and thought systems that dominate the planet run counter to that realization. People feel beaten down. Everybody wants love. Everybody. When you were talking a minute ago, single mother, child is sick, aren't you hoping for some mercy at your workplace?
A kind word. A kind word. I understand what you're going through.
And it's not like you didn't get it. It's that the system, the worker, it's an exploitation of workers, an exploitation of people, a raping of the earth, all of which runs counter to love. Because if you make the bottom line short-term corporate profits, there's a soullessness there. And that's what we're dealing with in this country and in this world, in a way. So I don't think it's that people don't get it. It's that too many people just feel, well, there's nothing I can do. And that's why I feel it's important, campaigns like this, because we can do something.
I definitely think we can, right?
Well, it's women like you two, maybe we can.
Yeah. Take out the maybe, Ed.
We will. We will. What are we going to do with Ukraine and guys like Putin? Your message resonates with a lot of people. The criticism I do here, to be fair, is that people think, well, you're not going to be tough enough with somebody like Putin.
It's just so outrageously misogynist to think that women somehow aren't tough enough. We
well, they didn't think that about Golda Meir. That's okay.
Thank you. That's the answer. You just gave me my answer.
Okay.
Beautiful answer. They didn't say that about Golda Meir.
I'm not talking about women in general.
They didn't say that about Margaret Thatcher. Not that I agree with Margaret.
Correct.
Yeah,
I mean, she was a
it's
tough
outrageous,
cookie
actually.
too. Right.
It's just pure misogyny. Pure misogyny.
But okay, well, how would you deal with Ukraine?
Well, on one hand, let's admit this. The United States is not blameless here. The United States, there were shenanigans with NATO, Aegis missiles in Poland, etc. However, none of that, in my mind, justifies the brutality of Vladimir Putin. I hear a lot of apologizing for Vladimir Putin that I find very disturbing. I certainly understand there's a war machine that we have to cut off the tip of the head of that thing. We need a reduction in our defense budget, et cetera. But that does not mean that there's never the appropriate use of military power. I have opponents, for instance, in this race who say that I'm pro-war and they're pro-peace. Well, what are they suggesting? They're not saying anything different than I'm saying. Of course, we need a negotiated settlement. And there was a meeting in Saudi Arabia a few weeks ago. China was there. Brazil was there. It's a multipolar world. This has to be an international effort at this point. But I want to see a negotiation in which there is still a Ukraine to negotiate. And I don't, if you ask the Latvians, the Estonians, the Lithuanians, the Finns, the Swedes, they don't have this naive view of Vladimir Putin. So when people call themselves peace candidates because they think the United States should not be supporting Ukraine in any way, if we were to simply remove all our support for Ukraine, the last thing there would be is peace.
Exactly.
There would be something so horrifying, and it would destabilize Europe in ways that perhaps there are some Americans naive enough to think, oh, that won't affect us, but it absolutely would.
Yeah. Either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution, though, you know?
I just think that the idea of the United States turning away from this situation, pretending it doesn't exist, pretending it doesn't have anything to do with us is very naive, and it would not be a solution. It would only exacerbate the problem. Yeah. And I also think, you know, one of the things that I have found interesting about this whole conversation is how many people understandably ask, well, why are we spending so much money on Ukraine? Mm-hmm. And by the way, what we're spending is 1/10 of our defense budget. So we should be yelling about the defense budget, but why are we screaming about that one rather than all of the myriad ways that the defense industry is making more money?
How can somebody, support you, get in touch with you?
Thank you.
And help you.
Marianne2024.com. And I will be back here in Nevada. We're just getting started big time in Nevada, and I appreciate any support. I hope people will come out and listen to me, join the campaign, give what they can, and let's create something beautiful in Nevada.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Presidential
Thank you
candidate
so much.
Marianne
Thank you so
Williamson.
much.
Thank you.
And Claudia Noriega-Bernstein.
Thank you.
My name's Mark LaSala, and I'm a real client of Ed Bernstein's. I was driving on the freeway, the truck cut me off, dropped this whole drive shaft. I had a piece fly through my windshield, went across my body, and across my face. I found Ed's office through word of mouth. They just said he's the best of the best. They put you at ease. They show you compassion. They have your back.
I'm Ed Bernstein. You've heard a lot of promises made by lawyers on TV, but if you really want dignity, respect, and trust, call me. The call is free.